We live?
Yep. This is the Inner City Left broadcast. I am Amin TMK alongside with Emoja Lil Tanky Sumler. We are here live from Puerto Rico, and we haven't been on for a week or so. We've been doing our thing. But as you may or may not have known, at the beginning of the year, Puerto Rico was experiencing a blackout. It was what do they call them? Like rolling blackouts.
Rolling blackouts.
But much of the island, I believe up to 87% of the island had no power for up to 3 days. And since we've been here, the power has been very spotty. You see flickering lights, all these other things. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about this power grid in Puerto Rico. And in general, what is the United States doing with Puerto Rico? Where are they at in terms of the infrastructure here, and why is Puerto Rico experiencing these type of blackouts and experiencing all these issues with their infrastructure?
I mean, to me, it's like straight up mistress shit, right? And this is what it is. This becomes really important when you're talking about a resurging imperialist nature in the United States, where you're talking about taking over properties like Greenland, and taking over properties like Canada, and taking over properties like the Panama Canal. Because Puerto Rico is a great warning story for what it is to be a mistress but never a wife. This place is in this perpetual kind of holding pattern, where you have a third of the people that want nothing to change, a third of the people that want to become a state, and a third of the people that want to become a fully autonomous nation. And again, we talk about this a lot on Inner City Left, but you know what it reminds me of? Taiwan, right? You have this perpetual gridlock, so nothing ever happens, nothing ever changes. It's just the material conditions get worse. For all intents and purposes, Puerto Rico is part of the United States of America, but it is not a state. It doesn't get the same autonomy that a state does. It doesn't have the same federal minimum wage, right? So wages are depressed here. And this is a tropical island. I mean, for all intents and purposes, again, right, in the continental United States, most of the United States is under snow right now. Washington, D.C., my beloved Washington, D.C., is getting 8 to 10 inches of snow. It's 81 degrees right here in the morning in Puerto Rico. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just an interesting thing. There hasn't been, and correct me if I'm wrong, one day we've been in Puerto Rico where there wasn't some type of power fluctuation. And it's just an interesting thing because, again, this is what privatization really looks like. You're able to test these kind of things in essentially a territory before you bring it to the United States. But you've already seen effects of this in places of the United States. Places like California, where it's not financially viable to keep energy going, and so the energy corporation just turn it off.
This is the LUMA Energy private power company. We saw this in Texas, where they privatized their power grid, and they experienced the same things. And there's always sort of this idea that capitalism will bring the efficiency that we need, even though we can look at countries that are more aligned with socialism, having at least those that are not under sanctions, heavy sanctions, or are affected by sanctions by the United States, still have power and things like this. You mentioned the three parties that are here and sort of a similar idea between Taiwan. I know that there was three parties. We were speaking with someone on the island, and they were saying there's three parties here, basically one for statehood. That's much one of the larger parties, the one that wants to maintain the status quo, which is one of the larger parties, and a smaller party. But again, I think it's smaller because they don't have the resources, and less people are willing to, it's kind of like Jill Stein. That third party, that Green Party, because that's the Independence Party, they don't get as many votes, but when you're here on the island, you can see that people do have a desire to have independence. There's a tremendous, I feel like, national pride here in Puerto Rico. We're seeing the flags.
It's everywhere. America, but it ain't America.
Yeah, and this is sort of a live aspect of colonialism that we were seeing before us. Can you talk just a little bit, and we're going to move on, but can you talk a little bit just about like the history of Puerto Rico and what this island has meant, over the last couple hundred years?
Puerto Rico was one of the first places that Cristobal Columbus came, right? And it was filled with indigenous people called the Taino, which were essentially raped and murdered to death by the Spaniards, to the point whereas there's almost no indigenous Tainos left. So what you have left is this new culture from the remnants of the Tainos that weren't exterminated. You have the Spanish who bred with them, and then the Africans that became, the Afro-Mestizo Latinos that are here. And it is important to circle back to why the independence movement is not as big as the others. And that is the simple fact that a lot of those guys have been out and out killed by the United States government to purposely disincentivize any forward movement to ever allow that from reaching a size where it can reach some type of sustainability, some type of critical mass. So it's not like organically they're like, nah, I don't really want to be a country. There's a little bit of fear about what will happen. Like, again, one of my dear friends on the island was like, well, there's a fear that will be like Cuba. But it's like, Cuba is actually having much better recovery efforts when
this is what they mean to say.
A tornado.
Right, wow, okay.
Tornado hurricane.
But I mean, it goes to the point of like that fear-based thing is, well, we don't want to be independent, so then the United States use their sanctioning power to destroy our island, which again you can see happening in so many places: Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia. You're not talking about Colombia. Again, the United
States. The wrong leader and sanctions is coming. Look at Venezuela, which is happening today.
And we see this happen all over South America, Central America, and the Caribbean, but also in Europe. We talked about the Georgia Dream Party. I believe it was the election in Romania where they're like, you guys picked the wrong, that's the wrong candidate.
Wrong one.
Again, I think, it's Puerto Ricans are seeing this. This is the same thing that a lot of the rest of the global South is always worried because 60% of the population of the world is under sanctions from the West in some capacity. So Puerto Ricans are seeing this and they go, well, I don't want to, provoke the ire of the United States.
It's better to not be noticed, right? You start to get that. And it's important to remember, right? You get all of the demerits associated with the United States, but none of the benefits. And what it reminds me of a little bit is Hawaii before World War II, which people forget. Hawaii was not even a state. When Pearl Harbor happened, Hawaii was not a state. So the United States was not attacked by the Japanese. An American territory, right, occupied by the American military.
And it was a military base, not a civilian site.
Right. Filled with indigenous people and American military, right? And so, again, just even as a Gen Xer, you're like, wow, the Japanese attacked America. Not really? Kind of? It's... because again, right,
it's not as cut and dry as they want to make it.
It's not as cut and dry as they make it. Now, again, should something happen, I don't know, a Russian naval vessel that was stationed at Cuba have some type of incident in Puerto Rico, immediately, oh my God, what has happened? They've attacked America, right? And that's what would happen. It would be treated, and in 30 to 40 years, everyone would think that Puerto Rico had always been a state, just like Hawaii.
Yeah. And again, and we're going to move on from this, but I just one last thing. It would be so easy, or I don't want to say easy, but it would be in the realm of possibility for the United States under, let's say, a democratic, I don't want to say Democrat, but a Democrat rule to say, you talk about this often, let's make DC a state, Let's make Puerto Rico a state.
Absolutely.
Because these are very liberal places.
Right.
DC as well. We live in DC, and now we're in Puerto Rico. Two of the most liberal places in the world that are not allowed to be represented on a federal level. Mm-hmm. And again, adding Puerto Rico as a state seems like counterproductive if you are a part of the imperial class or the colonial class of the United States.
It would break the gridlock that Americans have come to expect in this kind of a sardonic, apathetic way. Well, nothing can happen in Congress. It's a gridlock. Well, it wouldn't be a gridlock with 4 more Democratic senators. Because again, you're definitely going to get 2 Democratic senators from D.C. And probably for 10 to 15 years, you would be getting ostensibly Democratic senators from, or at least parties that would vote with the Democrats. Because again, they're not really Democrats here or Republicans. They have their own parties. But their political alignment often is more in line with the Democratic.
Historically. All we can say is historically that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on. Let's talk about, this is the biggest news story in the United States. We're going to get back on our geopolitics soon. There's plenty to talk about. We wanted to talk a little more domestically just because we were in PR. The wildfires currently happening, I don't want to say wildfires because they do seem man-made. There's a lot that can go into the discussion of why they're man-made, but the fires in Los Angeles and California in general, you're talking about many homes now being completely destroyed. There were conversations about not having enough water. The mayor was out of the country during these wildfires. We are seeing sort of another example of a huge collapse of the United States infrastructure that allows for things like hurricane recovery. Because we talked, the hurricanes that we hit, hurricane recovery, no good. Wildfires in California, even in the Palisades, even in Calabasas, where you have $5 to $10 million homes.
Man.
Yes.
Can someone think about Aubrey's house?
Yeah, exactly. Can someone please think about Kim Kardashian's house and all these other things? So you're seeing the United States infrastructure once again fail its citizenry. What was your take? I mean, as we are seeing this ongoing thing happen in California, what is your take from this?
What all of the left for the last 8 years at least has been saying defund the police. This is what that is about. The United States has chosen to overly invest in policing to the point whereas cities like Los Angeles and New York spend so much money on their police department that it rivals the military spending of developing nations. That money has to come from somewhere. And overwhelmingly, it's come from taking away money from other necessary services, like the firefighters. 30% of the firefighters in LA right now are people who have been convicted of crimes. They're being paid dollars, bare dollars, like $2 an hour at best, to fight these fires, which could take your life. How incentivized are you to do those kind of things? And then even when they develop these skills, when they're released from prison, they're not even eligible to go work for the firefighters, right? Even though you now have these skills. But this again goes back to a long-standing belief that we've talked about on Inner City Left for a long time. Instead of creating new military branches like Space Force, there has for a long time needed to be a nationalized firefighting service, because there are some fires that are so big, no city, no state could reasonably be marshaled against the ravages of the damages they can do.
You need national support.
You need national support. And again, we're seeing these kind of things happen. I look again to the huge earthquakes that happened in China. People are going to say, oh, we're always on China. Well, you know what? Give me another nation that's doing this kind of shit, and I'll talk about them. Because 10 minutes after that earthquake, the Chinese government had already landed military transports, 10 minutes, to provide services for their citizenry that were impacted by these things.
If they don't like China, may I mention Mexico? Because in the Yucatan Peninsula, when Hurricane Milton was running rampant, 2 days before it ran rampant through North Carolina and destroyed all these homes, which are still completely gone, not to mention Hawaii, which we haven't touched on. You have all of this happening, yet there was no real response from North Carolina and the United States.
But that's $700.
Right, $700.
Man.
But in Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, one of my faves, not China by the way, it's Mexico. I don't know if we're allowed to talk good about Mexico
Still
anymore.
a dirty socialist.
Right. All of those people on the Yucatan Peninsula were bussed out to homes that were shelter homes that were already prepared for them and their families. And if we live in the United States, right, it's supposed to be the greatest country in the world. Of course, we know that that's not true, us and us. But we don't have the support that, Mexico has. And Mexico's GDP is far, far below the United States. But like, what did you say? The New York Police Department is the third most funded military or domestic police force in the world. Not in the world, just say military. Right. Only the Chinese government spends more money on weaponry than the New York Police Department, which is ridiculous. I want to ask you one more thing, because you talked about this a lot. We always talk about like the evil corporations, right? And of course you got the easy ones, right? The Alphabet and Google. You got Amazon, you got all these big tech companies, Northrop Grumman, big defense. What's the other? The financial services like Goldman Sachs. But when we talk about other evil corporations, something you always mention is Nestle. Now, Nestle is the one who started sort of this commodification of water. Now we own the water. Do you see like that kind of being a direct line toward what's happening here in California?
It's one of those things, right, where people talk about the hypocrisy of the so-called left and certainly of liberals, right? If you sit down and talk to a liberal, they'll tell you all the reasons why you shouldn't eat at Chick-fil-A, which, okay, great, I'm willing to listen to those things, right? But are you telling me that Nestle is any less evil of a corporation when I can show you emphatically that they're more? When you have the CEO of Nestle saying things like water is not a human right, even though water is an essential element of life, the only thing you'll die faster than from lack of water is lack of oxygen, right? You got a couple of minutes, if you're out of oxygen. You got a couple of days if you're out of water. You'll die.
Yeah. Without food, you can go 2 or 3 weeks. Some people can go up to without eating.
Several days.
Yeah.
Several days. You and I both have had fasts that extended past 3 days. You know what I'm saying? You start doing that without water, and the body
shuts
suffers.
down. Yep.
The body suffers, right? So water is an essential part of the human experience, and yet, from the commercial mind state of a capitalist, it's only a resource to be exploited. In this way, Nestle shows that they're no different from any of the major pharmaceutical corporations that are willing to leverage medicines that you need for your life against profit. And this is not where it ends with people like Nestle, though it's particularly relevant to places like California, where Nestle has so depleted the natural aquifers that there just simply isn't even the water in the natural ecosystem left to be able to fight these type of fires. Now we could still talk about Nestle's child slavery for chocolate.
Yep. Keep going.
We could talk about all of these things. We could talk about how for decades Nestle lobbied against home leave for pregnant women to disincentivize those women from being able to breastfeed their children so that they could in fact sell Nestle breast milk, baby formula, right?
It's a breast milk, obviously.
Right. Artificial breast milk. Let's be honest. Artificial breast milk, right? Which is not nearly as good for human development as natural breast milk. No matter how you feel about these things, these are certifiable medical facts. The fact, and I think the kicker in all of this, Nestle is not an American company. This is not like
European, right?
Hershey's, right? And that's not to say that it would make it better, but at least Hershey's would be a domestic company depleting the natural resources in the United States. We got to hear about immigrants taking all the jobs. What about corporations from Europe that are literally depriving American people of their ability to even have water necessary to save their domiciles? Where is the conservative anger for those kind of things?
The conservatives always seem to have an issue when it comes to like anybody that's not white getting any sort of benefit. That's the United States in general.
Right. Could you imagine a Mexican corporation draining the aquifers in the United States? Dare I say Japanese? Dare I say Korean? Dare I say Chinese?
Yeah, and we also just have to talk a little bit about too, like capitalism is forcing us to stop caring about the environment in any real way. Not us as individuals, because obviously we still recycle, we still try to do all these silly little things that we can do to help stop this climate change, because all of this is being exacerbated by these incredibly harsh winters, these incredibly harsh summers, and all these science and climate, crisis scientists are saying, like we are now beyond the endpoint here. So it seems as if this will now be the norm. Rolling blackouts across the world, hurricanes. Earthquakes are obviously a little bit different, but they still need to be, handled properly.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what they say, this has been the official foreign policy position in the United States for a long time. Why does Trump continue to talk about Greenland? He talks about Greenland because the North is melting. The great Arctic caps are melting, and the United States wants access to the petrochemicals that are there, the rare earth minerals that are there, right? And by seizing